Hi, this tutorial we are going to talk about how we use a web form to load up a chart getting data from Microsoft SQL Server Database. So now we fire up the Server Explorer and then we add a connection to a database that we already have. So let's add a connection, browse, and I have a database project db.ndf in my C drive temp folder. So select this. Test that it works, and we attach our database. So we open up the database. There is 3 tables. So the main table that I'll be using is this monthly statistics. So let's take a look. So let's show table data. Ignore this. So we have event types like high temperature and water consumption. So this database has the year, the month. One means is January, 2 means February. And then this is the total count of high temperature occurring. So imagine we have a database with this, and we are interested to plot a chart with all the high temperatures, the counts across the month. So this is a database we are going to use. And now we are going to create a web form. So we create a new project. We select C# Windows Web in the temp folder. So let me give it a name. Call it Webform DB chart. We select web form. We don't need to host it in the cloud, and we click OK. Okay, we don't need this one. So the first page that we're going to look at is default.aspx. And we don't need all this, so I'm going to delete all of this away. In this simple tutorial, I'm going to use a JavaScript chart library. The one I choose for this simple tutorial is highchart. So when you go to highcharts.com/demo, you can see there's actually a lot of charts that you can choose from. Okay, so the important thing is when you plot a chart, you need to know how to configure the options. So you need to understand this, like specifying what is the chart, what is the title, what is the x-axis and y-axis, and the main thing is this data points. These are the data points that we are going to use. So for our case, we'll be using the data points from the database. So now I'm going to create a table with the one row and with 2 columns. What I'm doing now is to create 2 columns so that I can put a grid view on the left and the chart on the right. So on the left, later on I will drag in the grid view. On the right, now I'm going to define a div id, and I give it a name to my chart. I call it my line chart. So after this, I'm going to create a JavaScript, and I need to use the source, telling them it is from the highchart library. Code highcharts.com/highcharts.js. So we need to specify this is where the library is, code.highcharts.com/highchart.js, and then we write the script for it. So this is my chart. Dot highcharts. So now I'm going to specify chart. Type. So I'm going to plot a spline chart, which is a smooth line chart. The title, let me give a text, monthly high temperature counts. The axis, give it a title, month. The y-axis, title text. Y-axis will display the count. Finally, series. So I specify the type. I'm going to use a spline chart, and I give the name of my line, monthly high temp. Data. So this is the point where I don't specify the static data, but I want it to come from my database. So I give it a variable, maybe call it line data. The line data comes from the C# code behind. So after this, I'm going to go to my default C# codes. Okay, before that, I'm going to add the Web.config to add in my database string. So I double click. So by default, there is a connection string here, but this is not the one that we're going to use. So let me add one below. So I add one that I'm going to use. Add name, call it my DB connect string. And then the connection string, maybe I copy it from here. We want to get the connection string from here, the Server Explorer. So we right click on this database, goes to the property. This is where the connection string is. So we can copy the whole thing, copy, and we paste it here. Then we have our connection string configured in the web config, and the name is my DB connect string. So now we are ready to load up the data from the database. So we add in some namespace using system.data.sql client using system.config using system.data. So these are namespace we require, and we create our string, public string, and I call it line data just now. Let me create a method. I call it data. So every time the page loads, it will call this method load data of line chart, which will actually read the data from the database and load it onto the line chart. So now let's create the connection string. Configuration manager. Connection string connection string. So I'm going to use the mydb connect string, which is configured in the Web.config. Close it. Then I create the SQL connection. Create my connect. To new SQL connection. So I use this connection string. And I open my connection string. Open my SQL connection. My connect. Open. Now I define my SQL command. So select month value and total monthly count from this monthly statistics table. So this is the database monthly statistic table. So when we show table, so select this month value and the total monthly count, month value, where the event type is high temperature. So they will just select all these two columns of value, not the water consumption. Okay, so now we are ready to set up the SQL command. Put in the command text and the connection. And connect. Then we can load the data into a data table. DT. And we execute the SQL command and load the data into the data table. So at this point of time, we set up the connection string and the connection with the SQL command. Execute reader, load the data into the data table. And we want, the first thing we're going to do now is to show it on the grid view. We go to the design view and we go to the toolbox and we're going to get a grid view. So we drag the grid view, put it inside this first column. So we go to the source, the name is automatically given as a Gridview 1. Maybe we can change it to GV line chart. Okay, so once we have the data ready, we can load the data into the grid view. So we can GV line chart dot data source goes to this data table. And we do a data bind. And let's run. So there you see, this is the grid view loaded with the data from the database. You can close this. Stop it. We mentioned we are going to put the data into this line data. So we created our line data here. So now we are going to populate this string line data with the data required. And data format is supposed to be bracket x1 y1 comma x2 y2 comma and all the data points. This is the data required. So now we are going to prepare the string in this format so that it can go onto the line chart and be plotted out. So now what we do is we set up the data. This line data equals to, we start off with this. And then we are going to set up a loop. look through the data table. So we set a loop to look through all the rows of the data table. And for all the rows, we will get the data and populate the string. So line data equals plus equals to, let's run. There you have it. So that's where you have been plotted a line from the database value. So when the month is 1, is 10, count is 10. So when the month is 7, here the count is 34. So that's the end of this simple tutorial whereby we get the data from a database, SQL database, and then use a high chart to plot it out on the web form.